So today we're going to be making this transition, and then if you watch to the end, I talk about a couple of projects that I've been working on, similar to this, where you can manipulate a whole animation by just one control. So with that being said, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start this out by just making sure that our project is the right frame rate. For this one, I'm just going to do 30 frames. So it's pretty simple to follow along. And then I'm going to just bring a solid into here, turn this into a compound clip so then we can go into Fusion and then start making the animation. I'm just going to take my in and outs, slide them over. The first thing that I'm going to do is bring in a background, and you can take your background and bring it up to a particular window to view that node, and then it'll show you down here which viewer it's currently in. The other thing you can do is on that node you can hit 1 to bring it into viewer 1, or you could hit 2 to bring it over into viewer 2. So let's have our first background node here. Now the animation, as you've seen, it was like a block sliding over. So what we could do is we could bring in a rectangle to make our block, right? So we have our rectangle here. Let's bring up our inspector, and then we have our height and our width, and we could take our middle point and go to 0, 0, bring it down into the corner, because once it's in the corner, then we can rotate. That's the axis that we can rotate on. And we could then take these numbers and make them bigger. So we could make this 2 and make this one 2, so then it fills up our frame. And now you can see here our background is a lot bigger, and our anchor point is in the middle. And then we can rotate there, right? So then we would have sort of that effect. But as you can see here, we kind of can't get it away from the edge. So there's no way to really get it to be away. I mean, we could, I guess, bring this over like this and then extend the I don't even know which direction that is. The width, we can extend that width to something longer, and then do something like this. We could get this to work, but there's a couple of issues that we end up having with being able to manipulate everything later on, as you'll see. So what I'm going to do is, instead of doing that, I'm just going to have my background, and then I'm going to afterwards add a transform. Now the cool thing with a transform is you have your center, but then you can also set your pivot. So if I would take this center and make this center 0, so this is saying this transform is seeing the center over here, and then we take our Y and make our 0 down here. Now when we move this, if we play that particular node, now when we move this, we get kind of like this little guy going, right? It's sort of like the same thing that we had previously. So what we can then do from here is we could take our size and then just increase this. Now we can take this to 90, and now we have it here at the edge, and we can set a keyframe, and then let's move up a couple of frames and then set this keyframe to 0. Now we have this kind of an animation going here. Well, what the hell? Let's get rid of that. And then over here, let's put the keyframe 90 here. Okay, so now we have this kind of like an animation going. The only thing that we would have to add to this now is when we start to layer these, is adding that shadow. So we would add the shadow under here. There's a couple of different ways to do this, but so the easiest way to do this is if we are clicked on here and we hit Shift Spacebar, and then we just search shadow, and then get the shadow node, And then in our shadow node, we just increase the softness. If we look in here when we play that, now we have that gradient. So theoretically, what we could do is we could just take this, duplicate it, and now change, let's say, the color of this one. Let's change the color of this one to something that's actually like a little more appealing. So now if we play this one over here and then this one over here. And let's set this to fit and we can get rid of the media pool. Okay, so now we have the same thing going here with the same keyframes. Okay. All we would have to do is if we were to connect these two, we could connect them by taking this one, because this is the one we want laying on top, and then bring it on top of this one. But with our current keyframes, these two transforms have the same timing. So we could, come into the spline editor, take this particular transform, come into here, and then grab these two, hold shift, and then slide them over. Now if we play this, now we have a bit of a delay, right? So we could do that, but the easier way of going about doing this that I would personally do is hit shift spacebar again and then just type in time, and I would do time speed. And now in time speed, what we can do is we can say anything that gets piped into here, you can add a delay. So over here I have a delay and I can add a delay of, let's say, 4 frames. So now it's that same animation, because if we start to manipulate this animation where we have almost like a velocity thing going like that, moving it and everything, that could be cumbersome counting. But here, all we have to do is just in this time speed, we just add 4 frames. So let's say we want to add another color. We could take all of this, or let's just take the top half here, take all of this, bring it over here, and then connect this on top. So it's a foreground, and then the background is everything that we previously did. So currently we have a delay of 4 frames. And remember, this delay is going to delay these keyframes. So if we take a time speed and then add a time speed after it, those would obviously, one would render and then it would wait a couple of frames and then, continue pushing that render. So because these are all the same keyframes, we're just going to increase from here. So here we have 4. So let's just make it double that. So now we can just make this 8. And now if we watch this particular node, we drag it up here or we just hit the button. Let's quick change the color of this to something different. If we watch this, now we have all of the colors and we have that gradient added. So this is pretty simple so far, because at the start here, we have the transparent background. So if we were to lay this on our timeline above everything, our transparent background would show up, right? So it'd be the video underneath. So we'd have that video underneath, and then we would have this transition happen. But now we have to add in the video that will then show up after this, right? So we would have, let's say, one more fan blade, wipe, whatever you want to call it, and then we would have to have the other video. So what we could do is we could just have this go to another transparent background and then have this whole little transition that we have sitting on top. Or we could make this, so let's do that quick. So we'll just grab all of this and we're just going to copy and paste it. So now we have it here and we can connect these up, right? So now the idea here, let's change this color again. Now the idea here, and let's play this one over here. The idea here is we have to get rid of this yellow somehow. If we were to take this particular, comp and set it on top of something, we want it to be transparent values. So we want to get an alpha value back. If we were to then, let's say, take this particular background node, and let's come to where it's showing. If we take this particular background node and make this node transparent, all we're going to get is the previous node, because now this whole thing, when it wipes, it's just invisible because it's transparent. And because this is currently the background, it's just going to show whatever is underneath. So we have this is the background, and then this is giving the transparency, and it's just gonna show this. So this isn't working. So let's go back to, let's say, black. Now we have to figure out how to get this to then make these values to be a transparent, so that the alpha value, as you can see down here, we have to change that alpha value. So if we come over here, we have the alpha as 0, and then we look at this value, we have it as 1. So that's the value that we need to change. So to do this, we would come into the merge, and we would change this to XOR. And now we have that transparent background. Okay, now we have that value. We're down here, the A is 0. Okay, so now if we play this, all right, so now we're kind of getting there, right? But we don't have that blue that we had over here. And that's because down here in the time speed, we just never added another 4 on here. So now we add the delay, and now we have that added on there. So now we can take this, or actually, let's come back over. So now we can just take all of this that we've created, and we can just pipe it to the output, right? So the media out. So now we have it over here, and now we just have to put videos on top of it. So let me grab some stock quick. Okay, so now that I have some stock, I could take this. So here we have the transition starting, and it's wiping, great. And let's say we have to, right there, we would cut, whoops. Take this, delete that, and then bring our other video in here. So now let's see our transition, boom, boom. And then we have our transition. So that's how we could go about making this. There's a couple of other things that we can do as well. So currently, this is all sort of baked in here. We can't change this unless we come in and go into each one of these and state, what our transition time is. So we said our first one, it starts at 0, and then it was going to be 90 degrees, and then we came up to frame 9 and we had it 0. So if I was to change this, all of these others aren't going to be modified. So how do we go about modifying all of these here? So this is kind of cool in, doing this, but there isn't many, opportunities to change this much. So if we wanted to change the length of these are all driven by these static values here. We can't really change much more than that. So what we could do is we could have all of these controlled by 1. So if we click on this one, click on this one, click on this one, click on this one, now we see all of them, right? If we click on our second one and then clear the keyframes, now if we click on here and we go to expression and we grab from here, we come into our first transition, and we want them to all be powered off of this one. So now we get this value of transform.angle. So it's taking the transform 1, and then it's getting the angle value, and then it'll spit that over here. So now that it's in there, you just kind of have to move to refresh. If I look at this, we can see that it's being controlled here. I don't have keyframes in here, and this is being manipulated by down here. So let me add this to all of the others. So now all of these should be controlled by this first transition angle. So if I wanted to, let's say, extend this to 15 and put a keyframe here, and then let's get rid of this keyframe, now all of them will take up to frame 15 to move across. So now my transition should be a little bit longer. And the easiest way to see this is if I take this, if I come into here and then let's come to this frame and add a 0 here, what you'll see is these get a lot bigger because they're moving quicker. But then they still have this time speed here that is delaying them by a certain amount. So now all of these transforms are being manipulated by this one set of keyframes. So if the other cool things is I could come in and let's say this keyframe I don't want, but this keyframe I want, I could then come into my spline editor and get this angle, and I could come into here and let's say manipulate this, hit T, my ease in, and I change that. All of these are going to have that ease. So if I, let's say take this here and let's move this way down and refresh this. Take both of these, refresh this. Take this one and change my ease a bit. Now they're all going to experience this particular curve, and I don't have to go into each one of them and make that curve or copy the curve or anything of that nature. Now they're all going to get that. Obviously, for this particular look, this keyframe being out so far really isn't going to help any, but I think my program locked up. Oh, and it restarted. Let me get back in. Oh, you gotta love that public beta life. And I didn't save anywhere through there, so yeah, I'm gonna show you something that I've been working on with a similar transition that has a bit more math involved into it. But yeah, let me show that to you quick. So this is pretty much what I've been working on. It's the same idea of that transition, but this one has a fair bit of math in it, and the transition is virtually identical, but there are a couple of cool features. One, it will work in any project. So if it's a 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and 60 frames per second, it'll work in that. The other thing too is I have these two controls. Remember how I was talking about before, controlling the angle and how fast that went and making that the actual animation. So I have that similar thing here with the speed, but I also have timing. The one was 4, the next one was 8, 12, and so on. I also have that with one control as well. These parameters here, they get then put into an equation, which will then look at the project, its total length. As you can see here, there's a value here for its total length, and it grabs a couple of other things, but it's really cool because I don't think that people understand how powerful Fusion really is, and I'm starting to now actually put time into making templates that have a lot of these features in there where they can throw it in a 24 frames per second, a 30 frames per second, a 60 frames per second timeline, and it will work exactly the same across all of them. And it's just adding 2 keyframes. So in this whole thing, I have a keyframe here that is 0 and a keyframe here that is 90. Those are the only keyframes that, power this whole animation. And then I only have one value here for timing instead of having to say, okay, this one is 4, this one is 8, this one is so on, so on, and so on. But yeah, with that being said, I was going to, add a little bit more into here, but I wasn't expecting the crash. But the idea here with this is you'll get it'll come up in the effects library under templates. Currently I have one that's a test, but the idea is I want to make a bunch of these transitions and then give them to you guys so you could just come into, a folder that I'll hand to you guys, and then it'll be right in here. You pull it in, and then you'll get something that'll be sort of similar to this. And I don't know if you've ever made a Fusion clip, but you could take 2 clips that are on a timeline and take a little bit of one and a little bit of another. So if I was to cut you know, a clip, let me do that here quick and show you. If I was to take two clips and put them on a timeline, have them on top of each other. So like, let's say I wanted the overlap to be something like that, whatever that, you know, amount is, because this is where I want the transition. The idea here is that you could take both of these, you highlight here, and you turn it into a Fusion clip. Then when you take this into Fusion, now you have your two clips and a merge. And the idea here with what I'm working on is taking that same sort of thing where it's the two clips. So like, let's say we have two clips here. All we have to do is it'll be placed. This won't look like this. It'll just look like, it should just look like one little guy, and you'll drop it in here and it'll have three connection points. It'll have one for the top video, one for the bottom video, and then an output. When you click on it, you'll get controls like this that you'll then be able to control how that animation works. So the idea here is I want to do this for like transitions and all sorts of things. But yeah, with the program crashing, I kind of couldn't finish the other part. So I thought I'd throw this in here and give you an idea of what I've been struggling to work on. I wanted to implement something into the titles that I've been working on with the frames per second and like whatever you set your project up as. But the edit page and how Fusion titles work, it's not really the same, and some controls don't really like work together. But the idea that I wanted to do is be able to bring a Fusion title in, and as you size this up, so this is one of the ones I was working on, and it has like a lot of math in here where depending on whatever the length of these frames are, it does a bunch of different things. But I want to be able to get this to the point where I extend this and then the title is longer or shorter, and that's not affected by the frame rate, because obviously when I move this 1 second, and at 60 frames per second I'm adding 60 frames, and 30 frames per second I'm adding 30 frames. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to do behind the scenes to get this to work. But currently, the current state of the Fusion titles, from all the trial and error that I've been doing, I've just been getting a lot of errors, or when you're rendering it on the actual edit page, it's not really working that great. So that's why the current titles that I have under creative tools on my website, they state the actual frame rate, because I can't really change that. But yeah, that's an update of what I've been doing and attempting to do within the limited things that I can do in Fusion with regards to the edit page. But yeah, with that being said, let me know in the comments what you think about this one. Again, my name's JR, and thanks for watching.